name is Carrie Bolin. I know you all know who I am, but just in case you don't, I have the pleasure of working within the Division of Institutional Equity, and on behalf of my team and I just really want to thank you for prioritizing and creating space in your schedules to share space with one another as we explore really the tenets that make up Juneteenth, this idea of liberation and justice and freedom. In doing so, we have deepened our understanding, for those of you that have joined us since our Monday programming, of those ideals through the narratives of Black mothers as they mourn the loss of their Black sons, through the soul-searching work of lawyer activist Jeffrey Robinson as he re-educated us as to the depth of this country's roots in white supremacy and anti-Blackness, and through yesterday's conversation, where scholar practitioners shared their labor of love for reimagining freedom as a core value for creating global transformation. And today, we bookend our speaker series with the storytelling from an individual whose work in anti-racism activism started with the bombing of her parents' home and her father's First Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Ms. Donzale Abernathy and her siblings witnessed and participated in all of the major civil rights movements and marches, including the Freedom Riders movement, the March on Washington, the Selma to Montgomery March for the right to vote, and the Chicago housing demonstrations. As the youngest daughter of Dr. Ralph Abernathy, co-founder of the Civil Rights Movement and best friend to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., her family and Dr. King's children integrated Spring Street Elementary School, which led to mass integration of schools in the South in 1965. Her early childhood informed her calling to educate others about the ideologies of the civil rights movement of the 60s to inform today's movement around racial equity. In doing so, she taught teachers through the Teaching American History program. She taught teachers how to teach African American civil rights history. She has lectured on implicit bias for President Obama's organization, Organizing for Action. And at the 45th anniversary of the Montgomery bus boycott celebration, she was given the honor of introducing Mrs. Rosa Parks in one of her last public appearances. She has spoken for the Senate and Congressional Faith and Politics Civil Rights Pilgrimage for Congresswoman Barbara Lee's and Elihu Harris's lecture series, Daughters of the Civil Rights Movement, with Lucy Baines Johnson, Carrie Kennedy, and Peggy Wallace Kennedy. She has taken her work beyond the podium and onto the big screen with lead roles in such programs as Warner Brothers' Civil War epic, Gods and Generals, or the Emmy, and I should say, not or, the Emmy and Golden Globe award-winning HBO film Don King, Only in America, just to name a few. She has written and performed countless films and yet continues to keep her focus on the work of justice, liberation, and freedom as she volunteers for juveniles in the Los Angeles County Justice System and serves as a spokesperson for the CDC's HIV/AIDS awareness program and for Amnesty International. She is part of a long legacy of giants, and we're so privileged to have her. Please help me in welcoming Ms. Donzale Abernathy.
So much for coming. I'm honored to be here. I truly am. I'm going to move this, just like Carrie said to move it, so the people over here can see it. I just put it up here because this is the book that I wrote. I'm so happy and proud of my book. It was nominated by the American Library Association as one of the best books for young adults. I didn't get the win because the librarian said, you need to simplify your book. I'm like, I need to what? You know, like dumb down the book. And I was like, why? Why? Raise the level of intelligence of young people in America today. Unfortunately, it's no longer in bookstores. You can buy it online. And the books that you will buy online are library books. They're library books because when Betsy DeVos became Secretary of Education, she started to pull my books from libraries. But it's a great book. Look at it. I'll pass it around. You guys can see it. It's American history. And for those of you who are wearing the mask, you all are my brother and sister from another mother. I wear my mask every day. So if you want to put your mask on, it's okay. I believe in that. But I'm not going to have it on now because I'm going to talk. I've got to go fast. So I put this picture up here for Carrie's daughter, Kaylee, and she stepped out, but I wanted her to see, you know, my beginning. So that's me right there. That's Uncle Red and my mother. That's me and my dad, and Uncle Red on the phone. And that's me, that's Uncle Red, that's my sister who lives in Germany. Growing up in the civil rights movement was so traumatic. They used to call every morning and every evening in Montgomery, Alabama. and say they were going to kill us. You know, it started early in the morning, and then in the evening they would call. And one day they made good on this promise, and they bombed our home. But I'm not going to start there with you guys. What I need to start on here is Juneteenth. And this is what you all need to understand. It's really important. So after Uncle Martin died in 1968, my dad, he led the Poor People's Campaign, which is, it was so that poor people could get the National Food Stamp Program, which my dad lobbied for the creation of that. And the other was the free meal program that children get in public schools across America. Low-income children get a chance to eat. In San Bernardino County, which is the poorest county in the United States of America, not only do the kids get breakfast and lunch, they get dinner now, which is really important. But my dad lobbied for the creation of all of those things. But the other thing that he did, because I looked it up this morning, I saw it again, which was wonderful. It says, during the 1950s and the 1960s, the civil rights movement focused the attention of African Americans on expanding freedom and integrating. Integration was the most important thing. It also says, during the in Atlanta, some campaigns of equality wore Juneteenth buttons. During the 1968 Poor People's Campaign in Washington, D.C., called by Reverend Dr. Ralph David Abernathy, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference made June 19th the Solidarity Day of the Poor People's Campaign. And in subsequent revivals, because of what my father did, Juneteenth started to be recognized all over the rest of the United States of America. It was a wonderful thing to see the Washington Post credit my dad with reviving Juneteenth. Now this is the other thing you all need to see, you need to understand. So right here, this book is called The Extension of the Voting Rights Act. So every time you go to Congress, because see, the way we vote, it's an extension of the Voting Rights Act, and it's rediscussed, I guess, every 5 or 6 or 7 years about people of color having the right to vote. The only people that were naturally recognized as having the right to vote were white people in the United States of America. So my father testified in 1981, and it says the testimony of the Reverend Dr. Ralph David Abernathy on proposing amendments to the Voting Rights Act of 1965 presented to the subcommittee of the Civil and Constitutional Rights of the Committee of the Judiciary in the U.S. House of Representatives, May 7th, 1981. My father begins his talk and he says he needed to reflect on a personal experience that occurred and impacted greatly on my life and the life of my parents and immediate family, and is probably responsible for my being here more than any other fact. First of all, my paternal grandfather, now the late Mr. George Abernathy, was born a slave. He was the property of his white owner and slave master, Mr. Abernathy, until the age of 12, when President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation freeing him and 3 million other black slaves. My grandfather lived long enough to tell me the stories of slavery, as well as to pass on to me lessons of the Reconstruction period, when blacks had the right to vote and black men and women occupied political positions of power and authority in the United States House of Representatives, U.S. Senate, and state and local municipalities. So that was my father's grandfather. So that means my great-grandfather was a slave. Not only was Grandpa George a slave, his wife, Grandma Minerva, was a slave. And the Bells, who were my father's grandparents from his mother's side, were both slaves. So those are my great-grandparents. So don't let anybody make you think that slavery was that long ago. We've only been free here in the United States of America basically 50 years. I watched the world change in my lifetime. So I'm going to show you the story, and I'm going to tell you about my men. I got to go backwards now. My computer is slow. We had a little bit of technological difficulties a little earlier. So we're using my computer, and it's an old Dell computer. I'm not savvy like the rest of you all with your Macs, you know. So I'm just going to go back, and I want you to understand what motivated this, why this happened, how it happened. So, my dad was a soldier. He was raised by Grandpa George because his dad died when he was 16, and I just told you about Grandpa George. Other thing is, my Aunt Susie said to me recently, I went to see her, she'll be 95 years of age in September. I said, you know, Aunt Susie, tell me about Grandpa George. And she said, well, Donzale, you know he could pass for white. And I said, I had heard that, but she's telling me this. She was so, I said, well, Aunt Susie, how do you think you ended up so light-skinned? And she said, well, we just, you know, they always talk about Jake Abernathy, who was the father of supposedly Grandpa George. But he wasn't the father of Grandpa George because they just, you know, they did the census recently. And Lucindy, his wife, they looked for her and him, and he's married to another woman. So that meant the rumor was true. And Aunt Susie is pale, like this man. And I'm thinking, well, how did she get to be that pale? You know, it just doesn't happen overnight. Anyway, so my dad is the son of W.L., Grandpa George's son, and they live on the farm in Alabama. They have 500 acres of land. My father's real name is David. And so what happened? Okay, I'm going all the way back to the beginning. This is where I start. I want you all to look at that while I tell you, bring you up to speed. So, and this is the proclamation of the holiday that we celebrate, which was my dad's idea to honor his best friend. And you know, a lot of people think we have a holiday because Stevie Wonder wrote a song. Well, it doesn't happen that way. What happens is you have to fill the halls of Congress with letters and petitions and things like that, calling for the holiday. But beyond that, you've got to present it to a member of Congress. So my dad presented it to Congressman John Conyers from Michigan, from Detroit, and then to Senator Ed Brooke from Massachusetts, a black senator. Anyway, so that's how this came to be. So now my dad is living there in the country on the farm, and he was drafted at the age of 16 because he was smart. He graduated high school, that one-room schoolhouse. He was drafted, and while he was there in the high school, he had his first boycott, which was in the inferior science department. And so they drafted him, and because he was a boy, he was a 16-year-old boy, in order to control black men, they said, oh, well, let's make this boy the sergeant over all these men. So they made my dad, my 16-year-old dad, responsible for all of these men. And so the white men, because it was the segregated, you know, World War II, it's segregation. I think somebody wants to come in that door. So what they did was, my dad is in charge, and they go to Europe, and they fight in the European theater. But, you know, the thing is, which was incredible, after they finished what they were going to do in Europe, the black troops were then put on a ship and sent to the islands off of the coast of Japan. Well, my dad had developed rheumatic fever by the time they got to England. And so they kept him in the hospital, and they said, we're going to ship you back. And he was like, no, I don't want to leave my men. I'm the sergeant. I don't want to leave my men. And they're like, David, you're going back to Fort Devon, Massachusetts. So my dad went back to Fort Devon, Massachusetts, and they also told him, because of the rheumatic fever, he would never live to be 30 years of age. He was going to die young. And so he decided he was going to do something worthy with his life. He was going to be a minister. But everybody in his company went to the islands off of the coast of Japan, and when they arrived, every single person except for one guy was killed. So the only people that survived were Benny, this man, and my dad. My dad said they fought and died to defend the democracy of the United States of America, that we had to come back to the United States of America and fight to enjoy. That was wrong, and that's when my dad was really determined to fight for a noble cause, which would be our freedom. That's my dad, that's my hero. So these are my guys. This is his best friend, Martin Luther King, who's Uncle Martin. So I'm just telling you all how this whole thing started, because I need to give it to you so you understand. So because my dad has decided that this is what he's going to do, Martin, he had met when Uncle Martin was at Morehouse College. My dad was at Atlanta University getting his master's degree. So Granddaddy King came over to the school of ITC, the theological seminary where my dad was taking classes, and he said, listen, young ministers, I need you all to come hear my son preach. And they're like, my dad's like, sure, another young preacher, let me go here. So they went over to Ebenezer, and Uncle Martin is delivering his first sermon. And he was wonderful. I believe he prayed and practiced and everything. He just delivered a great job. At the end of the service, you know, the pastor goes and stands at the door. So my dad went over there to shake Uncle Martin's hand. And as he shook his hand, electricity happened between them. I don't know if that was the rug on the floor or what, but their hands touched, and that was this electricity. And they liked each other, and they smiled at each other. And then they went their separate ways. And this is a true story. My dad had a date with this young woman, and he was going to take her to Spelman College, which was the black girls' college, because remember, these are the days of segregation. So he's going to take this girl out, and she said, Ralph, he called her. She said, Ralph, I can't go. I've got a cold. I'm ill. I can't go. And my dad's like, you're going to be okay tonight? She said, no, I'm going to be sick tonight. So my dad said, okay, fine. But he was going to go by himself to Spelman, and as he's going by himself to Spelman, he sees Uncle Martin standing out in front of Sister's Chapel, this big, beautiful building. And he sees Martin, so he goes over to talk to Uncle Martin, and Uncle Martin's hand is like this as they're talking. And it doesn't make sense. So my dad follows Uncle Martin's hand, and as he follows Uncle Martin's hand, there was this woman who had told my dad she was sick. And she stood my dad up for this date with Uncle Martin. And this friendship was then created between these two men. This impenetrable friendship that my mother, no Aunt Coretta, no Uncle Martin's parents, no one could come between the two of them. This was it. It was just the two of them. So now they've met each other, and then they go their separate. You know, my dad graduates, and he goes to Alabama, where he becomes a college teacher over at Alabama State. These I'm just going to show you the signs and things they dealt with back then. You know, Mexicans and black people, they looked down on both of us together, which just means there's no reason for our young children to fight each other. There's a reason for us to come together, and this was, you know, really important. Cesar Chavez, that's my dad's friend. He came to my father. These are his dogs. One is called Boycott, and the other is called Huerga. And he said, which is the same thing as boycott, one's Spanish and one is English. And so he says to him, Ralph, help me help my people. And so my dad said, okay. And he's like, well, they're migrant farm workers and no one is, you know. My dad said, what do we need to do? We'll just boycott fresh produce in grocery stores across America so that the crops would rot. And then the owners would have to pay the farm workers a decent wage. And that's what we did. My dad came to me and he said, listen, I need you to give up your most favorite food. My most favorite food were grapes. I said, really? Really? He said, yes, you have to do it for the Latino people. Will you do it? I said, yes. And I gave up my grapes until I was 20-some years of age for the cause. So their cause is our cause. Our cause is their cause. Anyway, that's David, my dad. That's him as the young soldier. That's Uncle Martin around the time they met when Uncle Martin's graduating from Morehouse College. Anyway, so they're now living in Montgomery. And they're two couples. And they would go between one house and the next house. My mother was a better cook than Aunt Coretta. It's the truth. My mother could really throw down in the kitchen. She really wanted to be able to be a master chef. So anyway, Daddy took this picture. That's Uncle Martin, Aunt Coretta. That's one of Uncle Martin's favorite shirts. You'll see it in my book. And you'll see him in that shirt and another photograph. That's my mother and Daddy. And so they came west. You know, you can tell that's the west because the east doesn't look like that. Mountains in the desert and all that stuff. And they were just living their lives. My dad was getting ready to go get his doctorate, and Uncle Martin was working on his dissertation. That's Mrs. Mamie Till. I include that so people would know about Emmett Till, but I don't have time to tell you about Emmett Till. But Emmett Till's death created the political climate that all of these mothers are dealing with today with the murder of their children. Anyway, so they were, getting ready to do their thing, but then Rosa Parks was arrested, and Rosa was the third woman. My dad was the number 2 guy at the Montgomery NAACP. Rosa was a secretary at the Montgomery NAACP, and the way you did in the bus was if you were a black person, a Latino person, an Asian person, anybody that wasn't white, you'd walk onto the bus, you'd put your money off of the bus, you got off of the bus, you walked around to the back door, and then you would get on the bus. Sometimes the bus door would close. It closed on one woman, and they had to hold on to her, and the bus driver refused to stop. And the bus driver was the one who controlled the buses. They empowered the bus driver to do whatever they wanted to do. Anyway, people were fed up. Dr. Vernon Johns, who was my dad's mentor, who was the former pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, he had, raised the social consciousness. But the people over at Dexter Avenue were so upset with Dr. Johns talking about the crises of black people, they kicked him out of the church. And they thought, we're gonna bring in this dumb, stupid little boy named Martin Luther King, and we'll be able to control him because Uncle Martin was in his 20s. And thankfully, Dad and Uncle Martin were reconnected in Montgomery because they had known each other from school, and there they were together again. And then Rosa was arrested. And like I said, I don't know, she was the third. The first person was a girl named Claudette Colvin, who hopefully they're making a movie about. The second was an unwed mother named Mary Louise Smith, a black woman. And back in those days in the black community, especially in the South, we were so provincial and so snobby and so messed up, trying to live the way white people would think was socially respectable. We, crapped all over our own. So nobody was going to get behind Mary Louise Smith, but Rosa was a 42-year-old seamstress and she worked as, she was the secretary at the Montgomery NAACP, and everybody was going to get behind her. And that's why, so Edie Nixon called my dad, he said, Ralph, we got to do something. My dad said, I got this. He said, do me a favor, call my friend Martin. He's new in town, call him. And Uncle Martin was like, I'm working on my dissertation, I can't do it. My dad's like, you're gonna do this with me. I'm gonna pick you up and you're gonna go with me to these meetings. We're gonna do this. And Uncle Martin's like, okay, fine. He wasn't trying to lead a movement, he was just resistant. But the great thing is, when God reaches out and tells you what you need to do, and I don't know if all the educators and whether or not you believe in a higher power, but I do. I am the daughter of a minister, and the sister of a minister. But when there's a calling on your life, you have to answer. They used to say, you can run, but you can't hide. When God calls you, you're going to have to be there. Anyway, so this is basically what happened. And here's Rosa. That night, she's arrested. She's being fingerprinted. That's her mugshot. And this is that mass meeting, the first mass meeting that Uncle Martin didn't want to attend, but he attended. But when he got up to speak, when he spoke, he could put chills up and down your arm. And he said at this first mass meeting, and this is something that is very relevant for people who are immigrants today, there comes a time when people get tired of being trampled over by the iron feet of oppression. There comes a time when people get tired of being pushed out of the glittering sunlight of life's July and are left standing in the piercing chill of an alpine November. Work and fight until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Those are the actual words. If you go to that monument in Washington, D.C., you will not hear those exact words. I don't know why they wouldn't pay the King estate for the real words, but those were the words. Anyway, because of those words, black people took to the streets. For 381 days, they walked. We were so hungry for our freedom. You can see here, look at Uncle Martin. He's just a little young thing. He's as young as he could be. This is my dad. This is my dad's assistant because my dad is working at the college and he's the pastor of the church. And this is Edie Nixon, who was the Pullman porter who said, we got to do something for Rosa. Anyway, that's an empty bus. And my mother said, when the bus rounded the corner that first morning, there wasn't a soul on that bus. Everybody went crazy. Anyway, that's them. This is Bayard Rustin, who's with them, who came down and introduced the idea of nonviolence. Because this is what the young people need to know how to do today, because they are taking to the streets and they're trying to fight. They're fighting for common sense gun control legislation. Why? Because they're being killed in classrooms and in schools across America. I spoke in Michigan for an event that took place at Michigan State. I came back to Los Angeles, and a week later, the gunman went into the library, the student center at Michigan State, and shot and killed those students. I was just there. It's no joke. While I was in Atlanta just now making a movie, Aunt Baby, who's 102 years of age, had to go to the doctor. My friend Carmelita said, I'm supposed to take Aunt Baby to the doctor, but I can't take her. So Carmen, will you please take her this morning? So she takes Aunt Baby to the doctor. She says, Aunt Baby, she's 102 years of age. Sit right here. I've got to run to the restroom. And she runs out and she runs to the restroom. And this young man enters with his mother. And for whatever reason, he takes out a gun and he shoots and kills the woman, the white woman that's there. He takes the woman beside Aunt Baby. He looks at her, but shoots the other woman and kills these people in the office. This just happened in Atlanta, Georgia. This gun violence thing is really real, and these young people are there fighting for a better world. We owe them something. We owe them. Anyway, Aunt Baby was left standing, and my friend Carmelita was on the phone calling me, screaming, because her aunt was in the midst of all of this. Anyway, they need to know how to fight. That's my dad overseeing the crowd. This is the crowd, and the crowd, reason the crowd, it's standing room only. This is my dad's church, First Baptist Church. They were so hungry for our freedom because black people had endured 244 years of slavery. We endured 100 years of Jim Crow segregation. That's 344 years, longer than this nation had been a nation. We had been told that we were less than, and we were never allowed to be a part of the American dream. We were never allowed to assimilate or be the best that we could be. And that was not just black people. It was Native Americans. It was Latino people. It was Asian people. It was everybody who was non-white in America. Now, I'm sorry, but we can look at the Bible all we want, but when you look at the Bible, you know those people over there in the Middle East, they certainly don't have straight hair. And in the Bible, it says that Jesus' hair was the texture of wool, and wool in his skin was the color of the bark of the tree. So I'm married to a white man. And I'm telling you, my husband has to admit, people over there didn't look like him. So what does that mean? And then why is one group trying to say they're better? Because of the shade of their skin? That doesn't make sense. Anyway, I just want to show you the pictures. This is what it was all about. Dad, Anna Kamad, Edie Nixon, and Rosa, who was just amazing. And we walked, and they walked in the snow. That's my dad. So they arrested him and tried to say a boycott was illegal. That's Joanne Robinson, who didn't get the credit for her idea. She was the one who said, well, Ralph, we've got to do the boycott. Women never get the credit, but the women came up with the idea. And I don't know if you saw the people in the church back there, but those people in that church were women, not men. Women. Women were the facilitators of change in the United States of America, not women, men. And out of the civil rights movement, the women's movement was born. When I was a little girl, a woman wasn't even allowed to have her own bank account. And if you did, it was you and your husband. And you needed his permission or his signature on everything, which was absolutely ludicrous as far as I was concerned as a little girl. Anyway, that's them being victorious after they had they lost in court. Daddy and Uncle Martin won in the court about the boycott. That's Uncle Martin, that's them as ministers. And then this is the man from Pasadena, California, Glenn Smiley, who taught my father and Uncle Martin the principles of nonviolence. And Glenn was absolutely amazing. When the Los Angeles riots were happening, this is probably before you were born, but they had a riot here in Los Angeles over Rodney King verdict. And I'll never forget it. I lived on the west side over there in Santa Monica, and I barely went beyond Lincoln Boulevard, right? And when Los Angeles started burning, all of a sudden I felt at home for the first time, and I just followed the smoke to the black neighborhood and got on a food line and started making myself of use to somebody other than my own ego. And in the midst of all of that, I found Glenn Smiley. And every week I would go meet him in the east side of Los Angeles, where he was serving poor Latino people. He was amazing, but he taught me nonviolence, just like he taught Daddy and Uncle Martin nonviolence. And here he is on the bus with Uncle Martin, and that's Daddy, that's Mrs. Bascom, Uncle Martin, and Glenn, and my dad's assistant behind them. And then the white people got on the bus, so that's the power of boycotting, which is what you have to teach young people today. And it says here, there was a brand new Negro in the South with a new sense of dignity and destiny. We could hold our heads up. And so for every good that happened, something bad would happen. And so Carrie told you, this is what happened. They bombed my parents' home. So my mother's pregnant with me, and my sister's there in the house alone. And my mother had just finished watching the Jack Parr show, which was the predecessor for Johnny Carson, the predecessor for Jay Leno and Jimmy Fallon. And she said an angel awakened her. I don't know if an angel awakened her. I don't know if it was the shadow, but my mother and my dog, our dog Brownie, were watching this TV. Anyway, my mother got up, she went into the bedroom, and 15 minutes later, the entire front of the house exploded. Thank goodness the Klansmen who placed the bomb were not smart, because right here is where the gas line was, and if they had placed it 6 inches closer, the house would have gone up. My mother would have died, my sister would have died, Brownie would have died, and I never would have been born, because I was in vitro at that point. So I was born months later, trembling. I just shook. My hands shook, my legs shook, and my mother's like, please let my baby stop. She said I shook for 6 months, and then I calmed down. But if I'm in a stressful situation, I'm not good with people that yell, and I'm not good with loud voices. I still tremble. I just start to tremble. I was working on a TV show Any Day Now, and we had a very dramatic scene, and my cheek is going, and Artie Mandelberg, the director, is like, make that stop, make that stop. I'm like, Artie, I can't make that. Yes, you can. I'm like, I can't make it stop. I was under stress, and when stress comes, I just start trembling. But the fetus feels and experiences everything that the mother goes through. There is no separation between them. Let's see the next one. That's the other side of the house that was bombed. So then right after my mother's on the phone, they bombed the house, my mother's on the phone with my dad, and that's when they hear the second explosion, which was my dad's church. They bombed my dad's church. So they bombed my mother's home, my parents' home. My father was in Atlanta with Uncle Martin creating a whole new organization called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. They bombed his church, they bombed Bell Street Church, they bombed Mount Olive Church, and then they bombed the home of Reverend Robert Pratt, this white minister right here. Because he was a white man who was the pastor of an all-black congregation. He lived in a black neighborhood, you know, and this was the days of segregation, and they were angry. They were like, you need to be over here with us. And he was like, absolutely not. He said with his home bombed, he made the determination that he and his wife were going to continue to live there and serve that community. And he did that until he died like 2 years ago. Reverend Gratz and Mrs. Gratz still lived in that black community in Montgomery, Alabama. And Uncle Martin wrote in his book, Stride Towards Freedom, with Ralph's home and church bombed, all we could do is get down on our knees and ask the Lord to give us the strength to carry on. And they were determined to carry on. My dad just knew he was going to die. Anyway, here they are at the 4th Annual Institute of Nonviolence. And it was 900 Montgomery Negroes Thursday night. They all showed up because we were hungry for our freedom. And that's Uncle Martin being arrested at the trial for my dad. And this is how people responded in saying that race mixing is communist. And that was just fear. My dad used to say, we hate each other because we fear each other. We fear each other because we don't know each other. We don't know each other because we won't sit down at the table together. Let us sit down at the table together, and let's get to know each other. I mean, that's the easiest thing to do. So when this white kid, this white guy, you know, sat down at the table and wanted to know me, I was like, oh, and he was handsome, I ran away. But he persisted, and he persisted, and he persisted. So what was I supposed to do? I finally said, okay, uncle, I give in. Okay, I'll get to know you. Yeah, you want to go on a date? Is that what you want? Okay, I'll go out on a date with you. And then all of a sudden I was like, I'm too busy, and I went away. And he called, and he consistently called more than anybody else. So what was I supposed to do? Send him away? No. I married him. You know? And he's a tall white guy. That's the point I'm trying to make. He did that thing. He extended that olive branch, and what was I supposed to do? I just let go, and I let God, and I let love come through my heart, and he was gorgeous. And so, yeah. And it's been 25 wonderful years. He can't wait till I come home today and tell him what happened today. Anyway, so this is the first March on Washington. We're getting ready to have an anniversary for the second one, and I just did an interview with my sister about it for USA Today. So hopefully, you know, they're gonna photograph us when we go back to Atlanta, and in August, that'll be that. Anyway, Uncle Martin wrote a book. I told you about the book. And a crazy black woman came and stabbed him in the chest. You can see the letter opener right there. She said, "Are you Martin Luther King?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And she went, boom, and that was it. And as a little kid, he used to tell us and show us the scar. And he'd sit because he knew we would like, "Oh no, we're so glad you lived. We're so glad you didn't sneeze." Because he said, if I sneezed, I would have died. Anyway, and it ended up on the newspaper, and it happened in New York. So there were crazy people from all colors, all shapes, all sizes. This is the way I knew them. Uncle Martin was the voice, and my dad was the strategist. He decided what they were gonna do and when they were gonna do it. And then this is Jackie Robinson, who used his celebrity for good. And here they are with Jackie Robinson again. That's Jackie right above my dad, Fred Shuttlesworth. And they look so handsome here. I just love this. And then I showed you all this because they were at our house all the time. And our house was the main meeting place. This is Yoki, Uncle Martin's oldest daughter, who's my sister's best friend and my oldest friend in the world. And when I moved here to Los Angeles, Yoki moved here to Los Angeles. She actually literally died in Santa Monica. But she used to say, you know, I was young, like I'm being an actress out here. And she's like, excuse me? I knew you before you knew yourself. Okay. And she was like, we're going to the movies and we're going to do these. And we did all of these things together, which was absolutely wonderful. Our acting teacher was Mr. Walter Roberts. Mr. Roberts' daughter, Julia, is a big movie star, Julia Roberts. And her brother Eric used to have to take care of it. Every Saturday we'd finish ballet and then we'd go over there to the Roberts' house. And Yoki said when my dad was in the hospital, she's like, okay, we're going to the movies. I said, we are? She said, yeah, we're going to go see Mr. Roberts' daughter in her new movie. I said, really? She's got a movie. And we went to see Pretty Woman. And she was just the baby Julia grown up. But you never know who people are going to be in the course of life. That's Uncle Martin taking a burned, charred cross off of the lawn. This is Martin, who we knew as Marty, who was my sleeping buddy because he's born in October. I'm born in August. So I would always fight for him and take care of him. And this is us on the front of the house. That's me right there. That's my sister. That's my brother. That's my dad. My brother's gone. He died. So it's just me and my sister, my younger brother now. But because of this, is why we ended up going to Birmingham to boycott the stores. And Birmingham was when young people took to the streets. So none of the movement was possible if it hadn't been for young people. So like we got an Easter basket, we had an Easter dress, we had everything brand new for Easter. So the Freedom Riders, they were young people as well. They were college students. And so Congress of Racial Equality said we're going to test the integration now on those transcontinental buses. So it was Trailways and Greyhound, and they were going across the United States of America. And these young people got on the bus in Anniston, they set the bus on fire. So this is Jane Peck. His father owned a department store. They beat him unmercifully. because he was sitting next to this young black man. And they were just testing, can we ride the bus? Anyway, they got to Montgomery, and I got this off of one of these websites. My dad organized this mass meeting at his church. This is Jim's work, a young white man who was standing next to John Lewis. And Jim's work, when he got off of the bus, they beat him unmercifully. And you can see the cover of the newspaper where the blood is just dripping down. And the white people were so angry they wouldn't even let him go to the white hospital, so he had to go to the black hospital. Because hospitals were segregated. And I was born in a segregated hospital. Anyway, so the people were trapped overnight at my dad's church, and you can see they're all young. They're not old. Mrs. Virginia Durr, this white woman, she had attended the meeting. And the white Klansmen saw the white woman. They turned over her car and they set it on fire. Anyway, they're trapped overnight on the church. And so they got on the phone to Bobby Kennedy, the father, Bobby Kennedy. And he said, I'll talk to Governor Patterson. And Governor Patterson said, well, we'll get the police and some guys and we'll take care of it. And Bobby Kennedy was like, that's not good enough. Those people are white supremacists. Absolutely not. I'll send in the National Guard. And you'll see the people here sleeping. This is the National Guard that came in the wee hours of the morning. I remember this. I'll never forget it. Because the following morning when we awakened, there were black and white children, teenagers, college students, sleeping on the floor in our living room. And it was like, oh, wow. The reason I remember was because my mother was not there. And my sister, she took the little scissor and cut my teeny weeny little braid. You saw earlier I didn't have any hair. And she took it, and it was trauma. And that's why I remember this time. Anyway, this is John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, who would become the moral conscience of Congress. Uncle Maude, my dad, Wyatt T. Walker, who was their executive director. And then this man right here, his name is James Foreman, and James Farmer. He was head of the Congress of Racial Equality, which was nothing but college students. And Denzel Washington made a movie called The Great Debater. Well, this is who he grew up to be, that great debater. And yeah, so that's them in my parents' home. And you can see right here, I don't know if you can see, that's the back of our little rocking horse. That's why I show that picture, because I want people to see our rocking horse. Anyway, so the National Guard protected everybody. And they were able to go forward, and then the following day, they arrested my dad and these white students who, again, tried to integrate the lunch counter, and they're leaving the white waiting room. Someone asked me, what's the horrible thing about segregation? Not having bathrooms. So they had colored bathrooms, but they were dirty and they were filthy, and you didn't want to use them. And my mother wouldn't let us, and so we traveled on the road with toilet paper. I've got to keep going. Anyway, so these are students. You all can see, because of what happened, and it says CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, and you can see discrimination hurts Seattle, all the way to Seattle, Washington. Young students of conscience, black and white, took to the streets across America to fight and to stand up, which is what happened every time there's a shooting in America. That's happened here in Los Angeles when these college students just took to the streets. And I joined my husband, and we marched with these young people, and it was just wonderful to be in their presence, because this is what it's about for them, standing for justice and standing on truth. Anyway, that's us when we moved to Atlanta. And here you see the young people taking a knee. They integrate the lunch counter, they tried to. That's them going to jail. I gotta go fast. That's them leaving jail. And that's them taking a knee because we're in Birmingham. And that's a Good Friday march, because they decided to boycott the stores. Because we learned the power of the boycott, and that's the incredible thing. In Birmingham, if we couldn't try clothing on in the department store, why were you gonna go into the department store and spend that money? And if you couldn't use a bathroom in the department store, why were you gonna go into the department store and spend that money? Keep that money in your pocket. And they were saying, we're dungarees to church at Easter. Well, the merchants were like, oh, no, no, no. They had this advisory committee of these affluent young black people, but they were saying, please spend your money. It's like, wait a minute, who are you talking about? You're talking about supporting the merchants, or are you interested in supporting the needs of the people? Let's support the needs of the people. Because when I was little, if you wanted to buy a shoe, if I wanted to buy this shoe, I'd have to measure, take a string and measure the bottom of my foot, go into the department store, put the string in the shoe, and hope it fit. And if it didn't fit, you'd put newspaper or Kleenex tissues in the sole of the shoe and then wear the shoe. That's crazy. Why couldn't we try those things on? Why weren't there dressing rooms for people of color? Now this is happening in my lifetime. And I don't look that old, do I? Anyway, so they arrested Daddy and Uncle Ahmaud. And they throw him in the Birmingham jail. And in the Birmingham jail, they are separated. And they are put in solitary confinement for their own use. And I don't know if you all can read all of this, but you'll be able to see. They didn't even have a modicum of they didn't have a bed, they didn't have a mattress, they didn't have anything. And so they're on the dirty floor. And they wrote to Bobby Kennedy, and President Kennedy intervened, and they got better treatment. That's them in jail, Daddy and Uncle Ahmaud. That's Mother and Uncle Retta visiting. They end up on the cover of a magazine. They don't even mention my father's name. It's just Uncle Ahmaud. But, you know, my dad didn't care. It was about being free. That was what it was all about. And so people started boycotting across America. And this is what I need you all to see, because this is the most important thing, and I don't have that much time. You see these young people? Who do you see in front? Women. Girls. These are teenage girls. And they took to the streets and they said, don't buy segregation. You see that? That's a little girl. She's getting ready to get arrested. They asked one of the children, this little girl getting onto a paddy wagon, why are you doing this? And she said, because I want to be free. And they didn't understand. We understood the difference. If you live under that oppressive system of segregation, you know it. And it is an apartheid. And it's oppressive. And we wanted our freedom. So look at the young children. These are children that stole away from their classrooms for freedom. Can a man love God, whom he cannot see, and hate his brother, who he does see every day? You turn the water hoses. Just look at the pictures. These are kids, younger than all the rest of us in this room, who fought for our freedom and gained it for us. It's just incredible. This is day 2. So after the first day, they had a mass meeting at 16th Street Baptist Church. And they said, we're going to sit down so they won't be able to knock us down. So that's day 2. Then you see them on the ground. And there's a woman on the ground. The trauma and the terror and the faces of these kids. These were kids. This is Daddy and Uncle Ahmaud and Fred Shuttlesworth deciding what they're going to do, which is going to try and call off this boycott, because the merchants were like, listen, we will give you dressing rooms. We will let you have try-on clothing, and we will hire a black employee to work in the stores. So Daddy and Uncle Ahmaud have this meeting. My dad was the one who came up with the idea that we're going to, let's negotiate and work with them. And anyway, they decide and they tell everybody that they're going to do it, and they pass out, flyers and everything, letting, to the press release. So then they go upstairs to their hotel room, which is way up here in the front. They grab their things and they think they're successful, so they said, listen, we're going to go home. And so they're going to go back to Atlanta, but we're going to stop by the hospital and see Fred Shuttlesworth. They checked out, they got to the corner, and by the time they got to the corner, the whole front of this hotel exploded. They had placed a bomb. My dad said if we had tarried a few minutes longer, we would be dead or dying in that hotel room. Somebody in that crowd placed a bomb that day. Anyway, President Kennedy wanted to meet him. And that's them. They were discussing, anyway, I have to go fast. I have to go fast. That's my mother and Aunt Coretta. And then we came to Hollywood. And the reason they came to Hollywood is because these movie stars gave them money. And I know you all don't know who all these people are because you're young. Well, this is Tony Franciosa. Did you all ever hear him? That's Paul Newman. You all know him from Newman's Own. Holly Bergen, Joanne Woodward, Uncle Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., who I knew as Uncle Sammy, and Marlon Brando. And in that particular day, Marlon Brando gave a check for $50,000 to pay the bail for all of those young people who had been arrested. Brando was a man behind, I mean, he was an amazing man. The event happened at Burt Lancaster's house. He was the one who hosted the event. It was just incredible. That's Brando. And then there was the March on Washington, and this is the March on Washington. And I was there that day. I'll never forget it as long as I live. I had never seen so many young people before in my life. I'd never seen so many people of all different races, just like this room, who had come together for something noble and something absolutely incredible. I just remember running around by Abraham Lincoln, and the president of Morehouse College pulling me over. He said, "Do you know what's happening?" I'm like, yeah, I know what's happening. I'm 6 years of age, right? Yeah. And he said, and then my Uncle Martin was speaking at that point. He said, listen, just go right there, sit down. And I went and sat down, and thank God I sat down. Because Uncle Martin said that speech, my 4 little children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And my sister and I jumped up and down screaming. And my sister just said to me recently, she said, I was so hurt. He wasn't talking about us, he was talking about them. And I was like, boy, he was talking about us. You know, that's the way I perceived it. And anyway, it was Catholic Jews and Protestants together. And you can just see the people, it was black and white together. And that's my favorite verse of We Shall Overcome. It's black and white together, black and white together, black and white together now. And that was what it was all about. It wasn't about segregation. This is James Garner. I don't know if you all know him. He was a movie star. Diane Carroll. You know, and Charlton Heston.
Sidney Poitier.
Yes, Sidney Poitier. And Harry Belafonte, who just died. And Charlton Heston. You know, they've made him the face of the NRA. And Mr. Heston, I was making this movie called Gods and Generals. Mr. Heston found out I was in the movie. He said, I need you to have her call me. And so I called him, and he said, listen, you need to promise me that you're gonna tell everybody about my stand on civil rights. I stand on civil rights. They're trying to make it look like I'm a part of the right. I'm not a part of the left. I'm not a part of the right. I am not. I'm a liberal. And blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh my God. And he made me promise. He made me promise. But you know what? He was watching history change about his perception because he wanted to stand up for what the part of the Constitution, which was the right to bear arms. And they turned around and tried to rewrite history with him. So I promised him, and that's why I always show his picture. And he was the spokesperson. There he is. He's reading the Hollywood demands for black people, for black and brown people. He told me all of this, which is why I include all these pictures, because he was telling the truth about himself. Anyway, this is the march. That's my dad speaking. I don't even remember him speaking that day at all. But I remember Uncle Martin speaking, and it was just prolific. It was the greatest day. And so this is how they retaliate in Birmingham.
Crazy. That's crazy.
They killed 4 little girls. There were 5 of them in the bathroom. And so this is Addie Mae Collins, who was 14 years of age. This is Denise McNair, who was 11. Her mother's father is the first cousin of Aunt Eloise, and Aunt Eloise's daughter is my father's only goddaughter. This is Carol Robertson up above. Her family lives across the street from my mother's family. They just had a garage sale, and I went in and bought furniture from them because of Denise. Because of Carol. I just feel a connection. She was in a group called Jack and Jill when I was growing up. I don't know if you know what Jack and Jill is.
Yeah, we know what Jack and Jill is.
I was in Jack and Jill, right? So she was in Jack and Jill. But Addie Mae was 14. Her parents were dirt poor. Dirt poor. But I purchased the rights to her sister's story, and I've been writing it, and I need to finish it now because people are ready for my movie. And that's Cynthia Wesley, who was 14 years of age, and then Sarah was in the bathroom, and they were all in the bathroom as little girls just playing around. It was the first annual Children's Day ever in the church, and they were in the bathroom, and Sarah had come out of the stall. Mrs. DeMann, the Sunday school teacher, had come in there, saw that they were playing. She said, girls, I need you all to hurry up. Everybody wore white that day except for Sarah because her mother was so poor, and the white lady that she worked for gave her a red dress, and so Sarah wore that red dress. And they're playing in the bathroom, and Sarah's at the sink, and they heard a click, and they turned and they looked, and in came the wall, the bricks, mortar, and everything on top of them. Reverend Cross, the pastor of the church, said when he got into the hole, they told him not to go. He said, I'm going in. He went in. He said the first thing he found was a little girl's patent leather shoe. And he said he started to pull away, and then he said they must have known what was happening because their bodies were piled one on top of the other. They were all together. And then Sarah was the last one that they found, and she was over there by the sink. And a shard of glass went into one eye, and her forehead is bumpy to this day. She said they never gave her any trauma counseling. She needed counseling, so she can't go back to 16th Street Baptist Church. But the death of these girls were my earliest really understanding and knowledge of death, and it traumatized me. I didn't understand. But these were children. Because they died, Congress had to pass that civil rights bill. But I want you all to see, that's my dad standing there with Reverend Cross, whom I own the rights to his story. And they're laying Cynthia Wesley's body to rest. They were so angry and so evil, they killed our president on November 22nd, 1963. I'll never forget it as long as I live. They killed him because of his stand on civil rights. And then that's just the Nobel Prize. I'm gonna go beyond the Nobel Prize because right after that, the ocean. Young people took to the ocean. You know, we live here in California. In Santa Monica, they have a little plaque still up that little part of the beach that you could go to. And then you had that part in Manhattan Beach. But other than that, you know, on the East Coast, they didn't have that. They wouldn't let us go. If you were in Ocean City, Maryland, you could work on Ocean City on the island, but you had to get off. And Rehoboth, where our president, our beloved president, has his vacation home, you couldn't go to the beach in Rehoboth, Delaware. And you certainly couldn't go to the beach in Savannah. And it's like, are you kidding me? Man didn't create that ocean. Man can't even stop that ocean from rising, and it is rising, you know. They poured acid in the pool with black and white people. And I met the lady who was in the pool with this man. And then they killed the 3 civil rights workers, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Swerner. I'll never forget it as long as I live. And fortunately, I got the opportunity to make a movie about this story about these guys. But yeah, they hunted them like dogs. And in my book, you get a chance to see the mothers together, and you get a chance to see the man who told the truth, and you get a chance to see the earthen dam, and you see the pictures, because I went to Associated Press and I went digging for the real thing. But these are young people. That's Daddy and Uncle Martin confronting the sheriffs and the Klansmen who were actually responsible for killing them. And that's them meeting Malcolm X. They only met Malcolm X once in life. And then there's John Lewis. And they tried to throw him out of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee because they were like, we were here in Selma first. Well, wait a minute. Selma is where my dad met my mother. My mother is from Uniontown, which is 25 miles from Selma. My dad is from Linden, which is 35 miles from Selma. If you wanted to go shopping, you had to go to Selma. And so my mother went to Selma University. And when they decided, Amelia Boynton said to my dad, Ralph Abernathy, and Uncle Martin, I need you all to come on down here to Selma so we can fight for the right to vote. Uncle Martin was like, I don't know. And my dad said, I do know. I'm telling you about Selma. We need to go to Selma. So my dad was the first guy into Selma. But yeah, Selma was the place. And those Student Nonviolent Coordinating people that John Lewis was the president of, they didn't want to work with Martin Luther King. They were like, well, we were here first, but they weren't accomplishing anything. So Amelia Boynton wanted Martin Luther King to come. So my dad said, okay, we're gonna go do it. And they went down there. And on this particular day, Daddy and Uncle Martin were in Atlanta, and they weren't gonna lead this march. And this march was supposed to be canceled, but Jose Williams, this man right here, didn't cancel the march. So he calls my daddy, and he's like, well, can we do the march? And Dad's like, well, let me see, I'm gonna call Martin. So Daddy called Uncle Martin, and Uncle Martin's like, I don't think we should let them march. And Daddy said, if we don't let them march, Jose will be mad at us for the rest of his life. We gotta let him march. And so Daddy said, okay. And John Lewis, all those student nonviolent coordinating committee people said, well, you cannot march. And you definitely can't march with Martin Luther King. And John Lewis said, you know what? I quit. I'm marching. I'm doing this march. He put on his raincoat. He put on his backpack. He was ready to go to jail. He said he had his little toothbrush in there, and he walked on across that bridge into history. Okay? I love John Lewis. I have always loved him since I first met him. Anyway, that's John, right down the ground, because they were met and they were trampled by a mob. That man takes that billy club and he hits John on top of the head, which is why John would then start to speak within a speech impediment for the rest of his life. Anyway, so they go and they meet the president. And that's Daddy and Mother, Uncle Martin, and Uncle Walter Francois, who's my brother's godfather. And that's them with the president. And Lucy gave me this picture because all these pictures were associated, showing up from Selma. And Lucy Baines Johnson, Lucy. Anyway, so she says, every time Martin came to the White House, your father was there. I have to give you this picture. You need to let people see. So that's Congressman Walter Francois, because you couldn't get to the president unless you went through a member of Congress. And that's Uncle Martin, that's Daddy, and that's President Johnson. And they're discussing the creation of the Voting Rights Act and what the president needed in order for that to happen. That's them leaving with a smile on their face. That movie that Ava DuVernay made about Selma, it didn't go down like that. It did not at all. And anyway, you can see them laughing because now they have a plan. This is how they're gonna do it and what they're gonna do it. And I am so grateful because President Johnson sent this photograph to my parents' home, and it is as tall as it's as wide as I am, this way, the width. And it's like this tall, and it used to be in the foyer when my father was alive. Now it's in the dining room, but the president sent this exact photograph to us. That's them leaving. And so they take John with them everywhere after that, Dad and Uncle Martin. And that's them taking a knee. Colin Kaepernick did not invent that. That's what we did. That's what they did. Anyway, that's them. And listen, when January 6th happened, I'm over. Shoot. When January 6th happened, right? You're watching the news. I'm glued to and a voice just said, Donzale, look to the left, look to the left. I'm looking at this man in Nancy Pelosi's office. He's got his feet up on her desk, right? And I look, and there's this photograph on her wall. And all of a sudden it became personal and just started to sob for our democracy. And I was like, I'm nonviolent, but I'll go to war to defend our democracy. I'm an American, right? I'm an American. This is my country. My people have been here as long as this country's been in existence. Because on my mother's side, my mother's grandfather was a full-blooded Cherokee Indian. So I'm like, this is my land. This is my home. I will defend it. But when I saw them, and she put the picture there because of John. Because she loved John. That was her friend. And this is Reverend Jesse L. Douglas. He's still alive. Uncle Martin's gone. And this is James Farmer. He's gone. And that's Daddy. Anyway, that's them. And these are the people that came to support us. I just want you to see, and that's what they were met with. They killed Reverend James Reeb, a white minister from Massachusetts. 3 white men. They did a turnaround Tuesday. The 3 white men in Selma go into the soul food restaurant, and the white men see these 3 white men leave this black restaurant. And they beat them unmercifully, and they killed Reverend James Reeb. And this is the wreath that they have. Anyway, that's them, their heads together. That's their favorite photograph, Daddy and Uncle Martin. And this is the official start of that march. And the lays were given by the Hawaiian delegation. And I know that man that's indicted right now tried to say that because Barack Obama was born in Hawaii, that it wasn't a state, it's a state. There you see. And the Hawaiian And it says Hawaii up above so you can see. Anyway, that's the overview. That's Jim Lethera. He marched on one leg. He's a homeless man. They said he was a homeless man in Chico, California. He marched 55 miles from Selma to Montgomery on one leg for our freedom. So how could I be angry with white people? There were so many great white people that were part of the civil rights movement. It was us together. That's them. And so this is us. That's me right there. That's my brother and my sister. And my mother has her hand on my back because I'm a slow walker. And behind me is Uncle Martin, Uncle Retta, and all of these people. Right? This is day 4 of the march. So this man comes, these frustrated priests, and you can see he is yanking me on down the street. But we had to march. We had to march 8 miles per day. And that's us. And that's me in the striped sweater, my sister, my brother. And then that night the movie stars come. So my sister and I are standing on stage, just me right there. And that's my assistant. Uncle Retta's so nervous, she's getting ready to sing, and that's Harry Belafonte. And he brought Tony Bennett. And he sang, I Left My Heart in San Francisco, and I was like, I've never heard that before. It was absolutely beautiful. Sammy Davis Jr. kissed us on the cheek, and my sister and I vowed we'd never wash our faces again. Because we loved him. And Peter, Paul, and Mary were there, and Joan Baez, and this is Mary. She had this almost white blonde hair, and she was like an angel. And she was the sweetest person. So, so sweet. And she had 2 men. And when you're little, you don't understand. And I thought, she has 2 men? I thought she had 2 lovers. And I was like, that's what I want. It's so crazy, because all those things go through your head when you're a little girl. You just don't know. You look at things and you take them literally. Anyway, so this is the following morning, and Uncle Martin is late. And this is me doing what I always did, suck my fingers. I sucked my thumb, I sucked my fingers until I was 11. I am so sorry, but that's what I did. And we're waiting for Uncle Martin and Daddy and Mother talking to John Lewis. And then we start marching. There's Jim Lethera right there. This is Rosa Parks, it's behind in the white sweater. Anyway, we're waiting for Uncle Martin. And now we have to wait again. And then they start marching. He joins us. He's late. He always ran late. That's just the way he was. And that's my brother up above. And then we get to the Capitol, and that's John Lewis. And Peggy Wallace, who's my friend, she's now, I put their picture on my Facebook page as my main page. So it's a picture of, it's Lucy Baines, Peggy Wallace, whose father was George Wallace, the governor of Alabama, whom I should like, hate. But Peggy is so full of love and asking for forgiveness because of her father. And I remember her dad coming to my father, asking my dad to come see him. And I was like, Daddy, you're not going to see George Wallace? He says, yes, I'm going to see him. I'm like, well, then I'm driving. He's like, no, you're not. You're going to stay right here, and I'm going to go see him. And when he went to see George Wallace, he had been shot, right? And he's paralyzed from the waist down. And he's paralyzed in the waist down, and he said that all of those people that he had fought for, these segregationists, had abandoned him and left him. He said the only people that were there for him were black people. He said the best friend he had in the world was a black man who was taking care of him. And he introduced him to my dad. And he said he asked for forgiveness. And I was like, oh my God. I said, well, when my dad got back, I'm like, where's Lurleen? Who was his wife. She was also the governor of Alabama. I didn't know she had died of cancer. But Peggy comes because John Lewis invites me to come down there to speak, right, for all these members of Congress, right? And Peggy speaks after me. And as Peggy's speaking and telling the truth about her father, asking for forgiveness, I just started to cry. All the level of anger and hate that I had for George Wallace just came pouring out of my body. And I remembered my dad saying, I forgive him. And I was like, oh my goodness. When you rise to that level and you forgive, you learn what love is truly all about. You learn about God's love. And afterwards, I went over to Peggy and I just hugged her because she was speaking the truth. And she was asking forgiveness for what her father did. She said, my father didn't actually pick up a gun and shoot anybody, but he created a political climate where all of these innocent people who had been murdered and killed. So That's the power of nonviolence. That's the power of love. That's the power of forgiveness. And she said that her dad was upstairs in that Alabama State Capitol. And I remember one time she was speaking with John Lewis, and she said, I apologize, Congressman Lewis. I'm welcoming you to the Alabama State Capitol now, because not only was her father governor of Alabama, her mother was governor of Alabama. Anyway, that's Mary right there, and Peter, Paul, and Mary, and Harry Belafonte, and Joan Baez, James Baldwin. My brother trying to distract my dad. Uncle Martin's getting ready to deliver his incredible speech. And Uncle Martin goes to deliver that speech. My dad has put my brother between his legs, and I'm standing backstage with my sister, and Uncle Martin is saying, how long? Not long, because the moral arc of the universe is long, yet it bends towards justice. How long? Not long. And I'm doing this with my arm. I'm like, this is going to be great, Mama. It's going to be great. And I knew it was going to be great. Anyway, this is Mrs. Viola Lauza, this white housewife from Detroit, Michigan, who come down to Alabama. And she said, listen, I was born in Alabama. I'm a mother of 5 children. I can't do anything, but I will drive black people back and forth to the polls so they can register to vote. Well, she had dropped off that man up there, and she dropped this man. And this is Leroy Moulton, who was left in the car with her. He's 19, she's 35, and he's in the front seat of the car with her. And by the time they got back into Selma and she's trying to drop him off, the white supremacists see her. They know that she has been working with the NAACP and with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So they chase her out of town down Highway 80, that same road that we had just marched down, that same road that we had to drive down to go visit both sides of my family, my mother's family and my father's family, to see my grandmother. And then they lagged back. And they said, get your pistols ready. This is what the FBI informant said. He was like, we can't do that, we can't do it. And he's like, listen, you're in the big leagues now. This is what we're going to do. And they pulled up beside Mrs. Lauza. Because back then you could drive faster on the road than you can now. And she turned and she looked at them, and they took their pistols and they shot her in the face. Her brain splattered all over Leroy Moulton, and the car went into a ditch. Yeah. Mrs. Lauza died that day. After the Selma to Montgomery March. It was one of the most heartbreaking experiences of my life. When she died, they had to pass that Voting Rights Act, but LBJ was determined. And that's them, the Voting Rights Act. And this is Lucy, his daughter, my friend, who said she didn't want to go with her father that day, and President Johnson said, oh no, you're going to work with me today. I'm about to sign the most important legislation of my life. You're going. And she said, okay, fine, Daddy. And she said she's so grateful that he made her go. And here he is signing into law the Voting Rights Act, which would allow everybody that is a non-white person in this room today to have the right to vote. And LBJ passed more civil rights legislation than any president in the history of our country. And he made a mistake about Vietnam, but you got to look beyond Vietnam, because he did so much and he made it possible for us to be free. That's him shaking hands with Uncle Martin and with Daddy. And then we integrated the schools. And that's me, that little girl right here. That's me, that's my sister, that's my mother. It was Mother's idea that we do it. And this is Marty, and that's Yoki, and that's Aunt Coretta. And the only reason I agreed to do it, when my mother presented the idea to us, they put the children together, right? That's all the way that we always did it, the children together. I raised my hand first, because I thought, well, this is the truth. If we integrate the elementary school, then I can go see Eric Roberts, that little boy, Julia Roberts, his brother, who used to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for me. And I thought he was the most beautiful little thing, and I was like, okay, fine. And if I was in the black school, they wouldn't let me be an artist. And I knew that they taught art in the white schools, and I'm an artist. I could draw before I could write, and that's why I agreed to be a part of this thing and integrate. But every day I went to school, they called us the N-word. But I was a little fighter. And my sister used to stutter. And Carter Yates used to call her something called Bosco Bear. And he was a big old guy with a flat top, you know, that crew cut, old blonde crew cut, and big fat guy. And he was in the 7th grade, and I was in the 3rd grade. I was 8 years of age. And I said to him, you mess with my sister, I will fight you. I will fight you. And I didn't know I had that thing in me. But I had it in me, and I was ready to take him on. And Wesley called me the N-word in the 3rd grade every day. Not some days, every day. So if somebody disses you, what are you gonna do? Lose your temper? No, you got to find another way. you got to find another way. And Miss Elliott said to me, my third grade teacher, that Wesley loved me. I said, Miss Elliott, I know better than that. Wesley does not love me. However, when we get to be in the 6th grade, Wesley is out on the ledge talking about he's going to jump. And all the other children in the class just laughing. And I said, you all shut up. Because, I'm a minister's daughter. I got common sense. He taught us how to have reason. And I went to the edge of the window and I stuck my arm. I said, Wesley, come on. Give me your hand. Come on. He's like, you, who are you of all people? Why are you? I said, because I love you, Wesley. Because Miss Elliott had taught me to love Wesley in the 3rd grade. And I figured if he's full of that hate, something's going wrong in his life. Something's making him unhappy. But just because he's meeting me with hate, I don't have to meet him with hate. I can meet Wesley with love. I can do what Miss Elliott said do. So he was so frustrated, but he gave me his hand and he came on inside. Again, that's the power of nonviolence. Just because they hate us, or just because somebody hates you or somebody's angry, you don't have to go that same way. You go that extra distance to love. That's what I think it's all about. Anyway, that was us. I'm gonna show you the pictures. This is Memphis. That's Daddy and Uncle Maud. Jesse moved their hotel room to the top floor. He didn't understand why. That's Jesse, Jose, Daddy, and Uncle Maud. That's the night before. That's Uncle Maud. He spoke from his heart, but he was so weary, and then he comes back and he just goes straight into my father's arms. That's the following day on the balcony. He didn't die on the balcony. He died literally in the hospital in my dad's arms. But the bullet entered here. It severed the spinal cord and it exploded out of the chest. When they got to the hospital, they cut the clothes open, and that's when the daddy said they saw the gaping hole. Daddy stayed there in the room with Uncle Martin, and he said to the doctor, you're not gonna do anything to him. I'm gonna be here, you're not gonna do it. So Daddy and Bernard were there with him. That's Daddy just stepping over him right there because he's pointing out what happened, and that's Bernard. This is Bernard right here, Bernard Lee, who was my dad's student at Alabama State, who joined my dad at Alabama State during the Montgomery bus boycott and stayed with him from there to now. He was Uncle Martin's traveling companion. That's them going to the, with ambulance to the hospital. And that's it. And then he was gone. Uncle Retta called and, she said, let us know that Uncle Martin had been shot. My sister got on the phone. We had a little children's line. She ran and she got on the phone and she called Yoki. And they're crying together on the phone. And I'm like, Uncle Martin is gonna be fine. Remember, he got stabbed and he was fine. And I said, the Roadrunner. They keep killing the Roadrunner, but you're a little girl, you don't understand. I'm like, if they can kill the Roadrunner in the comic strips and he gets back up, Uncle Martin's gonna get back up. God doesn't kill good people. God doesn't let good people die. So I'm counseling them. And then Mother has to go to the airport, so I ride in the airport. My brother and I ride in the airport with our mother to meet Uncle. We ride in the car to meet Uncle Red at the airport, and I'll never forget. I'm standing out there on the tarmac, and I saw Uncle Retta and Mother embrace and start to cry, and that's when I knew he was gone. And someone stuck a camera in my face and my brother's face, and it ended up in a show, but I can see now that was the horror of what happened. The light went out for us. Everything changed from that. Uncle Martin was joy. He was teaching us about love, and that's what it was all about. It's all about love. My dad said, I told you before, we hate each other because we fear each other. We fear each other because we don't know each other. We don't know each other because we won't sit down at the table together. Let's sit down at the table together. Let's go to the people that are a part of the NRA and say, wait a minute, doesn't a gun frighten you? Don't you think, no one was ever born through a gun. A gun kills. Our young people are traumatized. Let's stop that. Let's sit down and figure out how we can do this together. We've got to go to the extreme. America used to be a much more together country, even under segregation. Now we are so divided. We can't stay divided like that. Not and prosper. But it's going to take each one of us to do our part. You all are educators. You all are in a position to inspire young people. You're not to tell them what to think, but inspire them to rise up and to take control, because they're going into a future that not a single one of us in this room, except for these little girls, are going into. We need to give them the weapons with which to fight and teach them how to live, teach them how to love, so that we will foster and grow. And you will have a responsibility, a great responsibility. And don't think that you can't do it. Know that you can. Know that you will. And God bless you on that journey. Find the strength, because they're going to need it and you're going to need it. Because it's not going to be easy. The days ahead aren't going to be easy, but it's going to be on us. God bless you, and thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Words are escaping me right now, but I think what I will say is you have such an awesome responsibility to breathe life into the missing pages of our history books. And you did that for us today, and I'm just so grateful that my dad was here for it. Thank you. So you all, your spirits have been filled. You now have this new content knowledge to deepen your understanding around this work, and you can be agents of change because of it. We want to now nourish you. Please don't leave here without grabbing a to-go plate. There's 2 tables, and both the tables have the same items on them, so you can, kind of tuck and go. And I just thank you all so much. Thank you for joining us today. We do have a wellness program tomorrow, hosted by our athletics folk. I'm so appreciative of our coaches, our athletic director that is hosting this cycling and fitness space. Show up. Yeah, a little encouragement there for a time of fellowship and some good cardio workouts. So that's at noon at GM 106. We'll see you there. Thanks so much. Have a great day.